Well, welcome back to Menopause Natural Solutions. Thank you for your company. I'm your host, Jen, and today I have a repeat guest with me. This is Dr. Meg Mill. Welcome back, Dr. Meg.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, we last saw you back in January of 23 talking about ending headaches in episode 149. Now, for me, headaches, there's so many different underlying causes, but a big one we often see is histamine. So I'm so glad to have you back to chat this time all about histamine. So, for women that haven't heard of histamine, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I feel like histamine is the new cortisol because it's one of those things that gets a bad rap. It's has a purpose in our body, but when it gets out of control, that's when we start to see all of these things happen, and it's starting to just be more and more widespread. I'm just seeing more and more in my practice, and I've talked to other practitioners. I'm interested to see if you've seen this too. Just see more histamine issues, especially post pandemics, which we can get into some of the reasons why. But histamine itself is actually a biogenic amine. And when the immune system detects an allergen or an invader, histamine is released primarily from our mast cells. So, mast cells and basophils are part of our immune system, and they're the part of the innate immune system. They are the first responders. So, when we get an invader, they're going to respond. The mast cells are going to respond. They're going to degranulate and they release this histamine. And histamine will increase the permeability of our blood vessels, and it actually allows our immune cells to reach the affected area more quickly. So we need it for immune defense. It actually helps protect against pathogens. It actually helps us regulate our gastric acid secretion. So we need it to break down food, aid in digestion. There are histamine receptors all over your body. So histamine can also affect serotonin and norepinephrine, our neurotransmitters. So it can affect our wakefulness, our cognitive function, our brain function, our mood. It's part of our allergenic response. It can affect bronchoconstriction because we're trying to constrict our airways to prevent it from harmful airborne substances. And it actually also creates a purposeful immune response. It actually recruits immune cells to the site of infection or injury through increased vascular permeability and blood flow. The problem is that when histamine release is excessive or poorly regulated, it can contribute to chronic inflammation. And we start to see all of these symptoms start to happen when it becomes out of balance.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd love that you mentioned that it affects all parts of the body. So a lot of people think, oh, histamine, is it more like an allergenic response? Is it just like a sinus? Is it eyes? But it's systemic. It's headaches, it's joints, it's flushing, it's
Mhm.
temperature regulation, it's mood. What other sort of symptoms do you see with this overactive histamine response?
And what is interesting is some of my biggest symptoms when I was dealing with a lot of histamine issues were GI issues and actually anxiety. So you're
Mm.
not even thinking when you're seeing those symptoms that this is histamine, but we see the typical nasal congestion, sneezing, asthma, difficulty breathing, the things that most people think of histamine. But then we see it a lot. It's a big underlying reason for headaches and migraines, fatigue, GI issues. There's more and more research with histamine. We know there's certain microbes we can get into. Heart palpitations, dizziness, like we said, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, PMS, irregular periods, flushing, joint pain, insomnia. We can see high and low blood pressure, dizziness, hives, rashes. So it is this whole body issue. And I think the thing is, it overlap. Like there's all of these symptoms. You also might feel like you're overreactive. A lot of people that have histamine intolerance will feel like, oh, I'm reacting to a lot of things. And it's sometimes hard to differentiate some other things that you think, like, oh, well, it could be this or it could be that. But sometimes when we find histamine as the connecting factor, we can resolve some of those other things that you're experiencing because we're finding that thread that's really the connector of a lot of these symptoms.
I'm glad you mentioned that because there is a lot of overlap with things like thyroid health. You've mentioned digestive health, But what I specialize in is the menopausal transition. So a lot of the women that I work with are perimenopausal. They're
Mhm.
having issues with estrogen. And we know that estrogen and well, you and I know, the women out there
Yes.
might not know that estrogen and histamine hold hands, like one raises the other and the other raises the other, and you end up with huge amounts of both of them. But would you like to explain it a little bit better?
Yes, and that is really an important thing for perimenopause because we know the progesterone goes down first often where we become estrogen dominant, and so we have this cycle where like you're saying, histamine's increasing estrogen. So actually histamine has receptors. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Estrogen actually has receptors on the mast cell. So like increased estrogen will actually purposefully tell the mast cell to release histamine. So then we get the feedback mechanism that we can see that, like you're saying, that we have the release of histamine is going to create more estrogen, creating more histamine. The other thing that starts to happen is that estrogen also prevents the breakdown of histamine. So we have diamine oxidase, and when we can get more into that, because I think that's a good, I like to give an analogy when we're talking about the breakdown of histamine. But one of the ways that we break down histamine is with diamine oxidase in our GI tract, and estrogen will also prevent that from work, that enzyme from working as well. So we're actually releasing more histamine and we're preventing it from being broken down. Progesterone, on the other hand, actually helps the diamine oxidase. So that's good for the breakdown of histamine. So we're seeing we want more progesterone. So when we get this imbalance of high estrogen and low progesterone, we start to see histamine issues. And that's why a lot of times women can think, okay, I'm not really reacting, my histamine bucket isn't overflowing, but then we get to perimenopause and we start to see a lot of these things happen.
Yeah. I think we should just go back over some of the symptoms that overlap with the two. Like I'm thinking
Hmm.
heat intolerance, I'm thinking headaches, I'm thinking
Hmm.
anxiety, I'm thinking joint pain. Jump in, help me out. What else? Some of
Yes,
the
mood, like
overlap
mood swings, brain fog,
headache.
cramping, all
Yeah.
the symptoms that you're thinking, okay, yeah, is this, PM, like the PMS kind of symptoms can be very similar to, and think about it, if so this is something that I want you to think about too. So when we're thinking about it in relation to hormones, you're thinking of histamine, you want to think of it like a bucket. So as long as your bucket is draining and it's not over, if you're not putting too much water, so think of it like a bucket with holes in the bottom actually. So it's draining through. So you're filling up the bucket, it's draining out. You're filling up the bucket, it's draining out. And as long as that's happening, it's fine. You feel fine, you feel good. But what starts to happen of one of two things. We either get clogs in the bottom of the bucket and it plugs it up so it can't break down. That's when we're talking about diamine oxidase. We have two ways that we break down histamine, which is diamine oxidase and methylation, which we're all talking about methylation now. So that's another pathway that we need to break down histamine. So if those become blocked, or if we're filling the bucket too much, and so when we're looking at this, when we're saying, okay, estrogen's something that's filling the bucket. Okay, maybe some histamine foods are filling the bucket. Okay, maybe some mast cells are being, degranulating, filling the bucket. And where do you get to the point where your bucket's overflowing? And that's why it's also, you can have symptoms of histamine intolerance at some points in the month versus another point in the month. So if your estrogen's really high in your luteal phase, maybe you can't tolerate a glass of wine or some avocado and some things that are histamine foods, or and then maybe you're okay at a different time, and it can be confusing because we're looking at the overall factors of everything that's contributing sometimes.
Yeah. Is it worth discussing what foods contain histamine? Like I know you've mentioned some of them, like you've just mentioned red wine is a big, so
Hmm.
some women might even notice that they're absolutely fine until they've had a bottle of red wine for dinner and all the flushing and the heat
Yes.
regulation, they don't sleep, they've got a headache. Is this the alcohol? Is this the histamine? But what other
Yes.
foods contain histamines?
Yes. So there's different kinds of things that we're looking at. So we have foods that are high in histamine. And these are foods such as aged cheeses, fermented foods, we have cured meat, we have alcohol, like you mentioned. And so I'd love to talk, like we can talk about the gut and how that contributes because there's a big gut connection with histamine. The tricky part is, and I really want people to hear this because we need to heal the gut in order to help histamine intolerance, and that's a foundation. But some of the things that you do in typical gut healing protocols are actually going to make you worse. So things like fermented food and bone broth are actually things that you don't want to have. And so a lot of people that are doing the work are backfiring, and it's confusing because symptoms are getting, worse or they're not getting better, but you might be doing things that are actually histamine producing. So foods, like we said, high. So those fermented foods, you need to be careful. And then we have histamine liberating foods. So these are going to liberate your histamine from the body. And those are things like strawberries, tomatoes, bananas. We have foods that can limit the diamine oxidase, in enzymes. And those can be even things like tea can do that. Um, Caffeine can block diamine oxidase. And the other thing that we really want to be careful about is freshness. So if you're a meal prepper, you can have a problem there because once we cook your food, it actually produces histamine, even if it's not a high histamine food. So we need to really think about leftovers and if you're really looking at histamine intolerance. Sometimes I tell people to flash freeze it. If you're someone who really likes to plan out your meals for the week, just freeze them right away and then thaw them when you're ready to eat them.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that's what I do. I like to cook in
Mm-hmm.
bulk and then I eat my serving, freeze the rest. But I freeze the
Mm-hmm.
rest in portion sizes. So you're not
Yes.
defrost, then you don't have the same problem when you defrost it and I've got, oh, I've got more than a meal. So
Yes.
that definitely has worked well for me.
Yeah, because I know that we have to do what works best for our schedule, but you're stuck if if you're like, okay, I need to do everything on Sunday and that's how my family works for the week, but now we don't want to eat leftovers. And so there's just all these little tricks that we can put in place that help. And I will link a guide. I do have a free guide. And I do have it broken down. We find a lot of the histamine food lists are not correct or confusing. And so I have lists really clearly written out so that people can look if they're like, okay, I want to know complete lists of food, it's in there. So that's a good resource to check, and I can give you that link.
Fantastic. I might take you back to gut health because that's an area
Yes.
that you wanted to expand on, but I hijacked you talking about food.
Yes and no.
Let's go back to gut health. What did you want to mention about that?
Yes. When we hear about histamine intolerance, a lot of people are talking about the low histamine diet. And that is a really good tool to see, okay, if I bring my overall histamine load down, am I less reactive? Do I have less symptoms? And you can start to see if that makes a difference. But you can get really hung up on that diet. And there's a lot of, as you I said avocado, I said bone broth, I said tomatoes and strawberries and things that are actually healthy for you. So we don't want to just, again, our conventional medical system sometimes is like the band-aid approach. We're looking for drugs, but we also just don't want to say, okay, just live on a low histamine diet and bring it down because that's not realistic for people and you don't want to have to do that. So really we need to find why you're having histamine issues in the first place. And most of the time it comes back to the gut. And so we really need to foundationally look at our gut health. And it comes in different ways. So one, we need diamine oxidase to break the histamine down. And that diamine oxidase lives in that mucosal border of your gut lining. And so you might not, you've probably heard of lactose intolerance, and we need to break lactose down by enzymes. You also need to break histamine down by enzymes. We just haven't really heard much about that. So we need to make sure those enzymes work. Then we also know that there's more and more research really with the connections of IBS. So we do know that certain bacteria are histamine producing or mast cell activating. So the type of bacteria that is in your microbiome alone could actually be the root. That's often the root of your histamine intolerance. I like to share the story because it's something that interesting. I worked with a man years ago who was having full body urticaria, like the full body itching, for 20 years. He remembers the day like he remembers it starting, and he was on like heavy antihistamines, hydroxyzine. He was taking shots, like nothing was working. And as soon as the medication would even start to wear off, he'd have to take another one because he'd just be itching all over. It would be red and itchy. And I said, well, we're going to do a stool test. And he was like, I'd have no GI symptoms at all. I don't know if this is something I need. And I was like, well, we're still, I think that it'd be good to see it. And he had really high levels of some of these histamine producing bacteria, one of which was Morganella, was one that he was particularly high in. And we did, within 4 weeks of doing gut healing protocols, his itching had stopped. And I think it's so dramatic. Like you can see these dramatic changes of things that you're not suspecting. And the reason, I'm just giving that story is because he just struck me like he was adamant that, well, no, I don't have any, I don't feel anything GI related. And we're like, yes, but we still need to do this. So we really need to look at that and see, okay, what does your microbiome look like? What bacteria is there? What do we need to build up? What do we need to kill off? Do you have specific producers? We also have to be careful with probiotics because we do, as we're saying, some of these microbes can be histamine producing, and some of the probiotics that you might be taking can have bacteria in them that can be histamine producing. So you just want to really look at it from a different lens, kind of when we're looking at it from the histamine lens in some of our gut healing protocols. We also think leaky gut is then creating this intestinal permeability, which is then, bringing some of the histamine out into into our body, creating more systemic symptoms. So we really, that is very foundational. If you're wanting to say, okay, you know what, this sounds like this could be me, that is what you need to start looking into, and really get the guidance in a way that really focuses on histamine. Because if you just do regular gut healing protocols, you might be aggravating some of these things.
Yeah, that's why it's always helpful to test. So,
Hmm.
because as you also mentioned, there are several strains that are histamine
Hmm.
producing. It's not one, it's not like we can go in and look at one of them. You actually need to look at everything. Um,
Hmm.
so I like that you mentioned that. So is that where you would start? Like, is that where you would, if somebody came in and you're suspecting histamine, is that one of your first steps, or what are your first steps?
Hmm. Well, so one of the things, like, if you're listening and you're like, okay, what do I need to do? You can start looking at a low histamine diet and just see if it makes any difference for you. Kind of that can be clues that you can start to see, are you seeing changes? So whenever I work with someone, we're looking at, okay, what is going on? We're looking at the root cause. So gut healing is a foundational piece of that. Then, we're also, the question is for each individual within that is, why are you having this issue? And so we're looking at, in addition to gut health, okay, what else is going on in your body that's creating this? Do you have an activation of mast cells? So some people will have mast cell activation syndrome. That's just because you have histamine tolerance doesn't mean that you have mast cell activation syndrome, but if your mast cells are overly reacting to everything. So some people get to the point where their mast cells just start firing at things that aren't even bad for them. So it's like you're eating food, or you're breathing air, or you're exercising, and you're starting to get these reactions when you do things. Most people with mast cell activation syndrome are more hypersensitive, more highly reactive, and they're starting to have this really almost dysregulated release of histamine. So some things that we look at there, actually one of the things I really like to work on is nervous system regulation. And honestly, most people can, I feel like I always work on nervous system regulation because I think everyone can use, really nervous system regulation, that calming. So we're looking at it in kind of a three-prong approach. So we're looking at bringing your body back in the parasympathetic nervous system, really working on that vagal nerve gut brain connection, and then working on some limbic retraining and rewiring to really feel safe so that your mast cells aren't releasing. Because we do need to feel like safe in our body and really start to rewire some of the way our patterns and the way we think and react to things.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's such a key treatment like everybody needs it. Like
Hmm.
I don't know how it's possible to live in
Yes. I
2024
know.
without
Yes.
any stress. But particularly for the women that I see, aging parents, possibly teenage kids at home, stress left, right, and center. I'm so
Mhm.
grateful that you mentioned that link.
I think it's just an essential piece, and probably not, when we're thinking about medicine and, treatment plans, not there enough. Like, I feel like that's, I just started bringing it into everything. I'm like, we all need this. And once you can do it, it's just like amazing how you can start to regulate your body and yourself within situations. I tell people, because people say, like you're saying, well, I have so much stress. There's nothing you can do about that. In some ways we can make choices, but some stresses are going to come up in life, but we need to be able to regulate ourselves within the stress that we have around us.
Yeah. For me, one of my favorite ways is walking in nature. I just love being
Hmm.
outside, fresh air, sunshine, nature. Like, what are some of your
Yes.
favorite ways?
Yes, I love that too. Walking, I have woods behind my house, so just will like walking, and I was doing that last night. Actually, it was evening, and it was just quiet. We're finally getting into the nice weather, and I just took my shoes off and just like walked quietly
Oh,
around my
yeah,
backyard just to kind
even
of bring myself down. But even breath work is, if you can do that wherever you are, so that's like a place to start. If you can get some breath work that works for you, just to feel that, bring that. I say people start the muscle memory sort of okay, what does it feel like to be calm? Where do I feel, how do I feel calm?
And a lot of people find breath work easier than meditation. So
Hmm.
sometimes it can be an easier starting point to just see how it feels.
Yes, I
Yeah.
know, just to get the feeling of peace too.
So did you also want to go down the thyroid connection?
Yeah, we can talk about the thigh. And some of it comes into like with Hashimoto's and the leaky gut and the in histamine. So, and it comes back to the gut, like with, there's a lot of different aspects when we're talking about hormones and metabolism, but we see the thought that there can be a loop of histamine and thyroid, and some of the symptoms also over interact really. So we're sometimes seeing the same things with thyroid and with histamine, and it's unpacking where we need to start and what's coming from where. So I will usually, when we're looking at thyroid, do testing and see, okay, where are your thyroid numbers? Are they optimized? The other thing is, some of the same nutrients that we need for thyroid health, we also need for our enzymes that are breaking down histamine. So we need to be able to digest and absorb those nutrients to get our thyroid to function well. We need to get them to actually break down the histamine in our body to methylate to be able to do the things that we need to do. So when I'm looking at that from that perspective, I also often will start with gut health,
Hmm.
because foundationally being able to make sure that we're able to digest and absorb the nutrients we need to support the thyroid in addition.
I really find that gut, like that is one of the key naturopathic principles is start with the gut. There are so
Hmm.
many gut everything accesses, gut brain, gut thyroid, gut skin, gut hormone, gut joint, gut everything. So I 100% agree. It's a really great place to start, even when there are non-digestive based symptoms. So the
Hmm.
gentleman that you mentioned before with the itchy skin, like it's just all of those different pathways that all lead from and to the gut. So
Yes.
I thank you for bringing that up. Now, another reason why I had you on today, and it's a very exciting reason, was you were actually about to host a histamine summit. How did that
Yes.
come about?
Yes. Well, I actually just started to see it more and more with everyone I was working with. I think that it is something that you may have just started to hear about histamine mast cell activation because we're actually becoming more aware of it. There's more research, and it's a connection with a lot of different things that I was working with. So I work with a lot of people, particularly women, with hormone issues, with gut health issues, with migraines that we were talking about. And once we would really look at it from this histamine lens, so many symptoms would start to fall into place. And then some people get to the point where they have mast cell activation, and we need to actually rewire the nervous system, rewire the immune system, and get everything to calm down. And it's just not something that's really talked about a lot. So I've been trying to get the information out there that this could be something that's affecting you, that it's one of the things now that we're seeing is affecting a lot of people. And so I actually interviewed 50 different experts on the topic. So we have like almost 50 hours of interviews. It's all free. So it's free to come join us and watch. And if you're interested in this topic, I highly recommend that you come. There's just going to be so much information, and like you can actually listen to a whole talk on the histamine thyroid connection. You can listen to the histamine hormone. We have it broken down into different topics. So if you're looking at specific information within it, there's a lot. There's even a celebrity chef on there talking about histamine delicious recipes that we can do, just to give you some resources, really. But yes, I'm really excited to share this information because I think that it is something that affects a lot of people without a lot of information out there to be aware of how this could potentially be impacting your health.
Well, thank you. That 50 hours worth of work that
I
you have done and you're giving away for free. Thank you. And plus all the hours that you would have put together writing out your handouts. You mentioned, what was the handout that you mentioned? Was it
Yes,
foods?
it's Essential Guide to Histamine Intolerance. So I will give you that link, and we can put that in the show notes for everybody to have as a good resource, as a place to start.
Fantastic. So talking about that, where do people go to start?
Yes, yes. Well, I have a website, megmill.com, and I have information. I blog posts. I have a podcast also called A Little Bit Healthier. So we always are talking about things on there that make you a little bit healthier, but we're focusing a lot on some episodes with histamine and mast cells. So you can learn more over there. And I'm over on Instagram at Dr. Meg Mill. So I share information over there. I do offer free discovery calls. So if someone wants more information, they just don't know if this is something that they're dealing with, you can always go on my website, and you do get me, surprisingly. I know that's not always, but I do. I'm excited to share this information.
So when does the summit start?
It is June 18th through the 24th.
Okay. Mark that in
Yes.
your calendar. I know
Yes, I'm
I
so
will.
excited. Yeah, we've been doing this for 8 months. I've been working on this for 8 months, so I'm really excited for it. It's like it's here. It's finally here. Yes.
Well done. That's huge. That is so huge. You deserve a holiday. I hope you've planned yourself
Yes.
a little break, some rest and recovery time afterwards. But thank you so much for your time today to come in and to share the word about histamine and its links and its impacts, its foods. And I wish you the best of luck for your summit.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. Bye for now.